We start off our story with Travis Walton from Arizona, 22 on November 5th of 1975, at the time of the incident. At that time he was a logger, and he was working in a forest in Snowflake, Arizona, with 6 other people. It had gotten dark, it was a late winter evening, and they were heading back in their pickup truck around 6:15 PM, when they saw a golden glow in a clearing. They described it as, quote, mind-blowing and small and disc-like. Travis seemed especially drawn to it, and definitely was, because he actually got up and ran towards it. The others called out to him to stop, but he was fascinated. He couldn't resist, and he ran toward the object, which had already been making a humming noise, but was now making one that was louder and louder. Suddenly, an energy discharge flew out of the saucer and zapped Travis hard, hitting him bam in the chest, and he fell to the ground. The others, in a rather poor expression of loyalty to their friend, hightailed it out of there, but returned shortly after, and there was no sign of Travis. He was gone. Travis, as he woke up, blinked solely. He found himself looking up at a bright, sterile, illuminated ceiling of a bright, sterile, illuminated room. His chest hurt, and he felt like he was dying. He sat up and found himself surrounded by aliens. Little aliens, 3 or 4 feet, with grey skin, big slanted eyes, small, slit-like mouths and making no sound whatsoever, the full 9 yards. One of them approached him, but he punched him in the face, knocking him to the ground. Another 3 approached, but he heroically drived over, grabbed a cylinder or test tube-like object and began swooshing it around, wielding it like an ironic lightsaber, absolutely ferociously, with no fear, but ironically with lots of fear. At this point, the aliens, wisely, since they seemed to be unarmed, retreated and left Travis alone to his own devices, at which point he then began to explore his surroundings and look around closer. Interestingly, much as with Bob Lazar and those who claim to have been in UFO abductions or at the site of crashes, he looked around and remembered the walls with a smooth, seamless aesthetic to them, and seeming to have no obvious seams, joints or fastens. And just like with the others, he claimed the entire craft seemed to have been moulded like wax, rather than assembled from parts. He then began exploring. Following various corridors, he eventually entered a circular room, containing a single, smooth, dentist-like looking chair mounted on a pedestal in the middle of the room. He then sat at the chair and noted some interesting things on the armrests, a lever on the left, and buttons on a small screen on the right, actually resembling today's touchscreen technology. Travis, curious, manipulated the lever, and something extraordinary happened. The ceiling of the room instantly seemed to become transparent, and he could see a spectacular view of stars. Moving the lever actually changed the star patterns around, as if he was moving through space, driving the craft himself. This seemed to attract some attention. I imagine the aliens saying to each other, "Squeeb, a human is driving us again. Let's call Andy. He's human, he'll know what to do." Because at this point, a man wearing a space helmet and a blue jumpsuit walked in. He was 6 feet tall, well-built, had normal human features, but his eyes, they were larger than normal human eyes, and gold. The man, maybe their human bestie, maybe trained in human deconfliction skills or cognitive abduction therapy, said nothing, in a way that was curiously reassuring, but gestured for Travis to follow him. Travis did so, and was led to another part of the craft, where he met 3 humans, 2 men and a woman, with long blonde hair and seeming to be very beautiful, looking much like the so-called Nordic aliens often reported in UFO encounters, said to seem benevolent or at least look trustworthy. Much like him, and true to this stereotype, they said nothing, only smiled and refused to answer questions. Some might have seen this as suspicious, I know I would, but not Travis. They led him to another table, laid him down, and he actually complied. They placed something like an oxygen mask over his face, he lost consciousness again, then he woke up on the roadside near Heber, 30 miles from the spot he'd been abducted, feeling cold and disoriented. He looked up, saw the UFO hovering above him momentarily, then it shot up like an instant into the sky. He went to the phone at a gas station, called for help, and realised that 5 days had passed since he'd gone missing. This is an incredible story. You've got the grey aliens, the craft described as exactly like the crafts seen at Roswell, Aztec, Kingman and other crashes, like the crafts described by Bob Lazar, with no bolts, rivets or screws, the blue light on the bottom associated with the alleged magnetic field technology, the discharge. Many, because of all this, claim Walton is credible and legit. After all, don't 6 witnesses back him up, all telling similar stories? Normally I would agree, but the credibility of the witnesses is the thing here. A few years earlier, Walton and Charles Rogers pleaded guilty to first-degree burglary and forgery charges in May 71. Rogers, present at the alleged abduction, the younger brother of Michael Rogers, the leader of the forestry team, as well as being Walton's future brother-in-law, had worked with Travis in breaking into the offices of a moulding company, stealing their payroll checks and cashing them to make money for themselves. They were allowed to plead guilty, make restitution and retract their pleas, so they, as young people, could have a clean record, since they were under 18, but this to me is very, very indicative. If they were lying about this, what else could they be lying about? Friends also claimed Walton was completely obsessed with UFOs, that he always had been, loved talking about them all his life. So is it really too hard to believe that this seemingly compulsive liar could have lied again? A lie that would profit him and fulfill his fantasies? Furthermore, the others also had incentive to lie. Rogers had heavily underbid their forestry contract with the US Forestry Service to thin the local trees, and they were heavily behind too. Because of how behind they were, out of every $27 they were making, they were charged a $1 penalty per acre, with the completion deadline being November 10. Failure to complete the job could not only lead to a $2,500 penalty, but a complete disqualification from bidding on future Forestry Service contracts. In addition, winter was approaching, and at this rate they'd have to wait until spring to complete the contract. So not only did they risk losing all their money, but much of it, up to 10%, was also frozen, so they'd risk losing the lot. On October 10, Rogers had called in and reported they'd be unable to complete the work on time. Isn't that interesting? A friend group obsessed over talking about UFOs, and then they claimed this happened? Furthermore, the reactions of the family members of Travis Walton were also odd. His mother went on the search party for him, but remarked with a shrug, "I don't think there's any use looking further," and gave up. His brother was similarly nonchalant, remarking with a shrug that UFOs always bring the victims back to the same spot. And Philip J. Klass, usually an unreliable source because of his bias against the paranormal, even claims in his research that Travis told his mother not to worry if he were ever abducted by aliens, because he would return safe and sound. How coincidental. How very, very coincidental. How coincidental that Travis, by all accounts a man caring for his mother, told her that he would be missing a while due to aliens and not to worry, and then he, just happens to be abducted by aliens just at that very same time. Now, I left this part until last, because I don't believe such things are a valid way of testing truth or falsehood, since everything and everyone reacts to stress and stimuli in different ways, but there's also the polygraphs. Now, polygraphs generally don't work. They're pseudoscientific nonsense, everyone reacts differently, no two humans are alike. I am not the kind of person who believes any belief in the paranormal or the unseen is pseudoscience, but in this case, these are pseudoscience. However, in this case the polygraph has been helpful, simply because Travis's alleged behaviour could signify more lies. He failed the first polygraph, and in fact, the first polygraph examiner outright called him a liar, not because of any of his answers per se, but because she observed him deliberately trying to regulate his breathing during each answer, a clear sign he was trying to manipulate the machine. Now, why would you need to manipulate the machine if you're telling the truth? He and his friends all claim they passed 5 out of these, but the next one was 3 months later. Enough time, dare I say, to get your story right and learn how to beat them. And I also find it interesting that the first examiner didn't think he was a liar because of his story per se, showing she was open-minded, but rather because of his behaviour. Here's what I think happened here. Travis Walton was very, very involved in his own fantasies. And as a fantasist and an author myself, I can relate. But here, he and his friends found themselves in a spot of bother. They had catastrophically underbid a contract worth much more, underestimated how much work it needed, fallen hugely behind on it, and risked losing all their money, and then some. They already loved UFOs, they've been talking about them very, very recently, so what better than to generate money from media interviews, long-term income from movies and deals, and to get out of their contract in the immediate term. I think they were driving, maybe on the same day, drinking together like friends do, bantering, exasperated, and thought, "Hey, why don't we hatch a UFO plan?" Yeah, that sounds cool. Travis goes missing, it's all mysterious. We insist to the forestry service it's too dangerous to go in there because of all the aliens flying around. We get out of the contract. Amazing, right? Now, I don't think these were their voices, but I think it worked more than amazingly. The contract was successfully cancelled, it cost them no money, the other money was released, they made all kinds of different money in the long run. Furthermore, Rogers, in 2021, showing there's no honour amongst almost certainly money-hungry thieves, actually disavowed Travis on Facebook, calling him money-hungry for not sharing recent profits, before suddenly, I can't for the dollar bills of me work out why, retracting that retraction of the fact that he was a witness. So yeah, I think it almost certain this is a hoax born of Travis's fantasies and the other's desire for cash and a quick remedy. But what do you guys think? Were one of you the crew allegedly involved? Are you Travis Walton? Do you know anyone involved with this? Please, write in the comments section, and anyone else, feel free to suggest to me other cases and things to cover. And with that, thank you for watching.